She offered water when others offered threats. She listened when others barked orders. Too soft, they said. Too nice for war. But when an enemy prisoner refused to speak, injured and defiant, he asked for only one person, her. She stepped into the room, no weapons, no fear. 10 minutes later, she walked out with the intel they'd been chasing for weeks. Not through force, but through humanity. And the one they mocked for kindness? She became the reason a dozen lives were saved. From which military base around the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that blend military precision with the power of compassion under pressure, consider subscribing for more content that explores how true strength emerges not from aggression, but from understanding when it matters most. The pre-dawn briefing at Forward Operating Base Damascus had begun with the familiar tension that accompanied high-value target operations in Syria's most contested regions. Captain Elena Rodriguez entered the hardened command bunker at exactly 0500 hours, her medical insignia catching the harsh fluorescent light that illuminated maps, intelligence displays, and tactical equipment designed for the most dangerous missions the 75th Ranger Regiment conducted. The facility, built into reinforced positions overlooking strategic river crossings, hummed with preparation for operations that would test every aspect of special operations capabilities in an environment where enemy forces had demonstrated sophisticated tactics and unwavering determination. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chin stood beside the primary intelligence workstation, his experienced hands manipulating holographic displays that showed real-time surveillance footage from drone assets positioned throughout the operational area. At 34, Chun possessed interrogation expertise that had proven invaluable across multiple combat deployments, with advanced training in psychological operations and human intelligence gathering that made him one of the most effective interrogators in the special operations community. His weathered features reflected the stress of operations where gathering intelligence meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Status report, Sergeant, Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through competence demonstrated under conditions where medical expertise meant life or death for wounded operators. Rodriguez's slight frame belied the physical and mental toughness required for combat medical operations, but her dark eyes held the steady confidence of a professional who understood that battlefield medicine required split-second decisions under the most extreme stress imaginable. Chun activated tactical displays showing the compound where intelligence indicated high-value targets were planning operations against coalition forces throughout the region. Three-dimensional models revealed security positions, patrol patterns, and structural vulnerabilities that special operations teams would exploit during the planned raid. Ma'am, target compound remains under surveillance, Chun reported, highlighting specific intelligence indicators on the main display. Drone assets confirm presence of at least 3 high-value individuals whose communications intelligence suggests they're coordinating attacks against coalition installations across eastern Syria. He gestured towards secondary screens displaying intercepted communications, behavioral pattern analysis, and psychological profiles of suspected terrorists whose capture could provide intelligence about planned operations targeting American forces. Current assessment indicates these individuals possess operational knowledge that could prevent attacks on coalition bases housing over 2,000 personnel. Rodriguez studied the intelligence data while checking medical equipment configured for the unique challenges of treating combat casualties during special operations missions. Her role as combat medic required her to be prepared for everything from routine injuries to complex trauma that would test the limits of battlefield medicine. Assessment of enemy response capabilities, she asked, noting defensive positions that could complicate casualty evacuation if the operation encountered unexpected resistance. Shin manipulated the display to show enemy weapons positions, reinforcement capabilities, and likely response patterns based on previous operations in similar terrain. Intelligence suggests moderate resistance with potential for reinforcement from supporting units within 30 minutes of initial contact. The assessment indicated that the operation would require rapid execution and immediate extraction to avoid enemy response that could transform a successful raid into a prolonged engagement with uncertain outcomes. Rodriguez understood that her medical capabilities might prove critical if the mission encountered complications that resulted in casualties requiring immediate treatment. Before Chun could continue his briefing, the command bunker's armored entrance opened and Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell entered, accompanied by his operations sergeant and 2 intelligence specialists from Joint Special Operations Command. Mitchell, a towering figure whose presence dominated any space he occupied, embodied the aggressive leadership style that had made him legendary among Special Operations Forces for completing impossible missions through decisive action and unwavering determination. "Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Chun," Mitchell announced, settling his imposing frame behind the tactical planning table. "This morning's operation represents one of our highest priority intelligence-gathering missions in this theater. Success could provide information that saves American lives across multiple coalition installations." The command bunker's atmosphere intensified as Mitchell's team prepared for final operational briefings. Rodriguez maintained her professional demeanor while recognizing that her medical support role would be critical if the operation encountered resistance that resulted in casualties requiring immediate treatment under combat conditions. "Colonel, would you like medical assessments of potential casualty scenarios?" Rodriguez offered, activating displays that showed medical threat analysis and treatment protocols for the types of injuries commonly encountered during special operations raids. Mitchell studied the tactical displays showing assault routes, security positions, and extraction procedures that would minimize exposure to enemy response. "Give me your assessment of interrogation requirements, Sergeant Chun. We need intelligence from captured personnel, and we need it fast." Chun activated psychological assessment profiles for the suspected terrorists, displaying information about their backgrounds, motivations, and likely responses to different interrogation approaches. "Sir, these individuals demonstrate strong ideological commitment and previous exposure to interrogation resistance training. Standard approaches may prove time-consuming." Mitchell nodded, understanding that rapid intelligence gathering would be essential for maximizing operational value before enemy forces could adapt to coalition activities. "What's your recommended approach for extracting information quickly and effectively?" Chun studied the psychological profiles more carefully, noting patterns that suggested these particular individuals might respond to specific interrogation techniques that emphasized psychological pressure and aggressive questioning. "Sir, aggressive interrogation emphasizing time pressure and psychological dominance should prove effective with subjects who respect strength and authority." Rodriguez listened to the interrogation planning with growing concern about approaches that emphasized psychological pressure over building rapport and trust with captured personnel. Her medical training included psychological assessment capabilities that suggested different interrogation methods might prove more effective for gathering reliable intelligence. "Sergeant Chun," she said carefully, medical assessment of stress responses suggests that subjects under extreme psychological pressure sometimes provide unreliable information to end interrogation rather than accurate intelligence. Mitchell glanced at Rodriguez with polite attention to her medical perspective. "Captain, while medical considerations are certainly important, rapid intelligence gathering requires interrogation techniques that overcome enemy resistance training effectively." Chun activated additional psychological analysis displays showing interrogation success rates using different approaches with similar subjects. "Captain Rodriguez, aggressive techniques have proven effective with ideologically motivated subjects who interpret gentleness as weakness that can be exploited." Rodriguez studied the data while recognizing fundamental differences between medical approaches that emphasized building trust and rapport versus interrogation techniques that relied on psychological pressure and aggressive questioning. Her training suggested that patient, empathetic approaches often produced more reliable intelligence than aggressive methods. "Sir," she said diplomatically, medical experience indicates that subjects often provide more accurate information when they perceive interrogators as trustworthy rather than threatening. Mitchell's expression showed professional respect for Rodriguez's medical expertise, combined with focus on operational requirements that demanded rapid results. "Captain, medical insights are valuable, but operational timelines require interrogation approaches that produce results quickly and decisively." As they finalized operational planning, Mitchell assigned Rodriguez to medical support duties that would keep her available for treating casualties while allowing Chun to focus on interrogation responsibilities. Her role emphasized medical preparedness rather than direct involvement in intelligence-gathering activities. Captain Rodriguez, Mitchell said, reviewing final assignments. You'll maintain medical support position with responsibility for treating casualties and providing medical assessment of captured personnel as required. Rodriguez accepted the assignment with professional understanding that medical support represented critical but secondary responsibilities during special operations missions. Her expertise would be utilized for treating injuries rather than contributing directly to intelligence-gathering activities. 2 hours later, Rodriguez found herself positioned in the medical support vehicle as Mitchell's assault team prepared to execute the raid on the target compound. Her role required maintaining medical readiness while monitoring tactical communications to understand when medical intervention might be required for treating casualties. The assault proceeded according to plan, with Mitchell's aggressive leadership achieving tactical surprise and rapid control of the target compound. Enemy resistance proved moderate but determined, resulting in several wounded enemy personnel who required medical assessment before interrogation could begin. Rodriguez received clearance to enter the compound for medical evaluation of wounded prisoners, her first direct involvement in the operation beyond maintaining medical support readiness. The tactical situation had stabilized, but intelligence gathering was just beginning. Captain Rodriguez, Chen called as she approached the detention area. I need medical clearance on 3 wounded subjects before beginning interrogation procedures. Rodriguez examined the wounded prisoners, noting injuries that required immediate medical attention but wouldn't prevent interrogation if properly treated. Her medical assessment would determine which subjects were physically capable of providing intelligence without risking their health. The first 2 prisoners suffered minor injuries that medical treatment could address quickly, clearing them for interrogation using Chen's aggressive techniques. But the 3rd prisoner, a man in his early 30s with serious but not life-threatening injuries, presented complications that required more careful medical management. This subject needs continued medical monitoring, Rodriguez reported. His injuries are stable but require ongoing treatment to prevent complications. Chen studied her medical assessment with obvious impatience about delays that could affect interrogation timing. Captain, how long before he's medically cleared for interrogation? Rodriguez continued her examination while noting psychological indicators that suggested this particular subject might respond differently to interrogation than his companions. Medically, he's stable enough for questioning, but his psychological state suggests he might be particularly resistant to aggressive approaches. Mitchell approached the detention area with obvious urgency about intelligence gathering that was critical for preventing planned attacks on coalition forces. What's the status of interrogation preparations? Chun activated his interrogation equipment while preparing psychological pressure techniques that had proven effective with similar subjects. Sir, first 2 subjects are ready for aggressive interrogation. 3rd subject is medically cleared but may require modified approaches. Rodriguez watched Chen's preparation with growing concern about interrogation methods that emphasized psychological pressure and aggressive questioning. Her medical assessment suggested that this particular subject might respond better to empathetic approaches that built trust rather than confrontational techniques. Sergeant Chun, she said quietly, medical evaluation indicates this subject might be more responsive to patient, non-threatening approaches. Chen's expression showed professional disagreement with Rodriguez's assessment. Captain, aggressive techniques are most effective with subjects who have ideological training to resist interrogation. Mitchell studied the situation while balancing operational requirements for rapid intelligence gathering against medical recommendations that suggested alternative approaches. Begin interrogation with standard aggressive techniques. Modify approaches only if initial methods prove ineffective. Chun initiated interrogation procedures that emphasized psychological pressure, time urgency, and aggressive questioning designed to overcome resistance training that prevented enemy personnel from providing intelligence. His techniques had proven effective in previous operations where rapid results were essential. Rodriguez monitored the interrogation from her medical support position, noting physiological responses that indicated the subject's psychological state was becoming increasingly resistant rather than cooperative. Chen's aggressive approach was producing defiance rather than compliance. After 90 minutes of intensive interrogation, Chen had gathered minimal intelligence despite employing increasingly aggressive psychological pressure. The subject remained defiant and uncooperative, demonstrating resistance training that effectively countered traditional interrogation techniques. Sir, Chen reported to Mitchell. Subject continues to resist standard interrogation approaches. Recommend escalating psychological pressure techniques. Rodriguez observed the subject's physiological responses during a medical check required between interrogation sessions. What she noticed challenged assumptions about the effectiveness of aggressive interrogation methods. Colonel, she said carefully, medical assessment indicates this subject's resistance is increasing rather than decreasing under psychological pressure. His stress responses suggest he's becoming more determined to resist rather than more likely to cooperate. Mitchell studied Rodriguez's medical assessment while balancing operational requirements against interrogation effectiveness. Captain, what's your medical recommendation for improving interrogation results? Rodriguez hesitated, understanding that her medical perspective might conflict with established interrogation doctrine. Sir, physiological indicators suggest this subject might respond better to empathetic approaches that reduce stress rather than increase it. Chen looked up from his interrogation planning with obvious skepticism about alternative approaches. Captain, empathetic techniques are interpreted as weakness by subjects with ideological motivation. Rodriguez studied the subject's psychological profile more carefully, noting details that suggested his background might make him responsive to different approaches than those typically employed with captured terrorists. Sergeant, his profile indicates family background and personal experiences that might make him responsive to humanitarian rather than aggressive approaches. Mitchell considered Rodriguez's assessment while weighing operational requirements against interrogation effectiveness. Traditional aggressive techniques weren't producing results, but alternative approaches carried risks of appearing weak to subjects trained to exploit perceived weakness. Captain Rodriguez, he said finally, you have medical clearance to attempt alternative interrogation approaches if you believe they might prove more effective. Chen's expression showed professional concern about departing from proven interrogation methods. Sir, allowing medical personnel to conduct interrogation represents significant deviation from established procedures. Mitchell studied the tactical situation while recognizing that current interrogation approaches weren't producing the intelligence results that operational success required. Sergeant Chun, maintain oversight of alternative approaches. Medical techniques can be tested if they offer potential for improved results. Rodriguez understood that she was being given opportunity to test whether empathetic approaches could prove more effective than aggressive techniques for gathering intelligence from this particular subject. Her medical training emphasized building trust and rapport, characteristics that might translate to interrogation effectiveness. Sir, I recommend beginning with medical treatment of his injuries, combined with basic humanitarian considerations like food and water, building trust before attempting information gathering. Chun activated monitoring equipment that would record alternative interrogation techniques for analysis and comparison with traditional aggressive approaches. Captain, maintain focus on intelligence gathering objectives rather than purely medical treatment. Rodriguez entered the interrogation room with medical supplies and basic humanitarian provisions, her approach emphasizing healing and care rather than psychological pressure and aggressive questioning. The subject's response to her presence was noticeably different from his reactions to Chen's aggressive techniques. I'm here to treat your injuries, she said simply, beginning medical procedures that addressed his wounds while demonstrating genuine concern for his physical well-being. The subject studied Rodriguez with obvious suspicion about American military personnel who showed concern for enemy casualties rather than aggressive interrogation tactics. His previous experience with coalition forces had emphasized capture and aggressive questioning rather than medical care and humanitarian treatment. Rodriguez continued medical treatment while engaging in conversation that emphasized shared humanity rather than political or ideological differences. Her approach focused on basic human needs and concerns that transcended political conflict. You have family? She asked while treating his injuries, her question expressed with genuine interest rather than interrogation purpose. The subject's response showed surprise at American interest in his personal life rather than military intelligence. Rodriguez's empathetic approach was creating psychological conditions that differed dramatically from his expectations about enemy interrogation methods. As medical treatment continued, The subject began responding to Rodriguez's humanitarian approach with cautious cooperation rather than determined resistance. Her emphasis on healing and care was producing psychological responses that aggressive techniques hadn't achieved. "Why do you care about enemy injuries?" he asked, his question indicating curiosity about American motivations that extended beyond military objectives. Rodriguez continued her medical work while explaining her role as a healer whose responsibilities included treating all casualties regardless of political affiliation. Her explanation emphasized professional medical ethics rather than political or military considerations. "My job is healing," she replied simply. "Injuries need treatment regardless of politics." The subject studied Rodriguez's genuine commitment to medical care that extended beyond political boundaries, his expression showing gradual recognition that her humanitarian approach represented authentic concern rather than interrogation tactics designed to exploit perceived weakness. As conversation continued, the subject began sharing personal information that wasn't directly related to military intelligence, but created psychological conditions where trust could develop between enemy combatants who recognized shared humanity despite political differences. Rodriguez maintained her empathetic approach, while gradually introducing questions that could provide intelligence value without appearing to exploit the trust that her humanitarian treatment was building. Her medical background provided natural opportunities for gathering information about enemy activities. "Are there other wounded who need medical attention?" she asked, her question expressing genuine medical concern while potentially providing intelligence about enemy personnel and activities. The subject considered her question carefully, recognizing that providing information about wounded enemy personnel could help Americans provide medical treatment while potentially compromising operational security for his organization. Rodriguez waited patiently for his response, maintaining the empathetic approach that had proven more effective than aggressive interrogation techniques for establishing communication with this particular subject. Her humanitarian focus was creating conditions where intelligence gathering became secondary to building human connections. "There are wounded in the mountain camps," he said finally, his admission representing the first substantial intelligence information he had provided during hours of interrogation attempts. Rodriguez continued her medical treatment while carefully exploring information about mountain camps that could provide valuable intelligence about enemy operations throughout the region. Her empathetic approach was producing results that aggressive techniques hadn't achieved. "Medical supplies are needed?" she asked, her question maintaining focus on humanitarian concerns while gathering information about enemy locations and capabilities. The subject's responses provided increasingly detailed information about enemy positions, personnel, and activities as Rodriguez's humanitarian approach continued to build trust and rapport that transcended political conflict. Her medical focus was proving more effective than aggressive interrogation for gathering intelligence. Over the following hour, Rodriguez gathered comprehensive intelligence about enemy operations, personnel, and planned activities through empathetic conversation that emphasized shared humanity rather than political differences. Her approach had produced results that traditional aggressive interrogation techniques couldn't achieve. When she emerged from the interrogation room, Rodriguez carried intelligence information that exceeded anything Chin's aggressive techniques had produced during hours of psychological pressure and confrontational questioning. Her humanitarian approach had proven more effective than traditional methods. "Captain Rodriguez," Mitchell said, reviewing the intelligence she had gathered, "your alternative approach produced remarkable results. How did you achieve cooperation where traditional techniques failed?" Rodriguez considered her response while recognizing that empathetic approaches had succeeded where aggressive methods had failed. "Sir, building trust through genuine humanitarian concern created conditions where information sharing became possible rather than viewing interrogation as enemy exploitation." Chin studied the intelligence Rodriguez had gathered, comparing results from empathetic approaches with outcomes from aggressive techniques he had employed for hours without success. "Captain, your humanitarian approach produced more intelligence in 1 hour than aggressive techniques achieved in multiple sessions." Mitchell examined the comprehensive intelligence data Rodriguez had gathered through empathetic conversation, recognizing that alternative approaches had proven dramatically more effective than traditional interrogation methods for this particular subject and operational situation. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, Your techniques will be documented for training purposes. Empathetic approaches appear to offer significant advantages under specific circumstances. Rodriguez understood that her success had demonstrated the effectiveness of humanitarian approaches for gathering intelligence when traditional aggressive techniques proved inadequate. Her medical background had provided alternative methods that achieved superior results. As they prepared to extract with valuable intelligence that could prevent attacks on coalition forces, Rodriguez reflected on lessons learned about the relationship between empathy and effectiveness in military operations where human connections proved more valuable than aggressive confrontation. The intelligence she had gathered through humanitarian concern would save lives across multiple coalition installations, demonstrating that empathetic approaches could achieve operational success that aggressive techniques couldn't accomplish. Her gentle methods had proven more effective than aggressive interrogation for gathering critical information. 3 weeks later, intelligence Rodriguez had gathered through empathetic interrogation enabled coalition forces to prevent coordinated attacks on 6 different installations that would have threatened thousands of American personnel. Her humanitarian approach had produced strategic intelligence that traditional methods couldn't achieve. Mitchell's operational report specifically commended Rodriguez's alternative interrogation techniques for producing intelligence results that exceeded traditional aggressive methods. Her empathetic approaches were recommended for implementation across special operations forces facing similar challenges. Rodriguez received orders to develop training programs that would teach empathetic interrogation techniques to special operations personnel whose missions required gathering intelligence from subjects who resisted traditional aggressive approaches. Her humanitarian methods were being recognized as valuable tactical capabilities. Chen was assigned to work with Rodriguez in developing combined interrogation approaches that integrated traditional techniques with empathetic methods, recognizing that different subjects required different approaches for optimal intelligence gathering effectiveness. 6 months later, Rodriguez's empathetic interrogation techniques had been implemented across multiple special operations units operating in regions where traditional aggressive methods had proven inadequate for gathering intelligence from culturally and ideologically motivated subjects. Her training programs emphasized building trust and rapport as tactical capabilities that could prove more effective than psychological pressure for gathering intelligence under specific operational circumstances. Humanitarian approaches were becoming recognized interrogation tools. Field reports from units trained in Rodriguez's empathetic techniques showed consistently superior intelligence gathering results compared with traditional aggressive approaches when dealing with subjects whose backgrounds and motivations made them responsive to humanitarian rather than confrontational treatment. Rodriguez's methods had proven that empathy could be a tactical advantage rather than operational weakness in military environments where human connections provided access to information that aggressive techniques couldn't obtain. Her gentle approach had become a powerful military capability. The intelligence-gathering techniques that had once been dismissed as too soft for war were proving more effective than traditional aggressive methods for achieving strategic objectives that required understanding human motivations rather than overcoming resistance through psychological pressure. Rodriguez's humanitarian approach had demonstrated that strength in military operations sometimes emerged from empathy rather than aggression, and that tactical effectiveness could be enhanced by recognizing shared humanity even with enemy personnel who possessed critical intelligence information. Her success had shown that building trust could be a more powerful interrogation tool than applying pressure, and that gentle methods could achieve results that aggressive techniques couldn't accomplish when dealing with subjects whose cooperation required respect rather than intimidation. The captain who had been mocked for being too nice for war had proven that humanitarian concern could be a formidable military capability when applied with tactical intelligence and strategic understanding of human psychology under operational conditions. Rodriguez's empathetic approaches had evolved into recognized special operations capabilities that were saving American lives by gathering intelligence through understanding rather than aggression, demonstrating that compassion could be as tactically valuable as conventional military skills. Her techniques were being taught to special operations forces worldwide as examples of how humanitarian approaches could achieve strategic objectives that traditional aggressive methods couldn't accomplish, proving that empathy was a tactical advantage rather than operational weakness. The woman who had offered water when others offered threats had become the reason dozens of lives were saved through intelligence gathered by building human connections rather than exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, demonstrating that true strength sometimes emerged through gentleness. Rodriguez's career had proven that military effectiveness could be enhanced by empathetic approaches that recognized shared humanity even in combat environments, and that tactical success sometimes required understanding rather than overpowering enemy personnel who possessed critical information. Her humanitarian interrogation methods had become standard training for special operations forces whose missions required gathering intelligence from subjects who responded better to empathy than aggression, proving that gentle approaches could achieve superior results under specific operational circumstances. The captain, who had been dismissed as too soft, had demonstrated that compassion could be a powerful military capability when applied with tactical intelligence, and that humanitarian concern could achieve strategic objectives that aggressive techniques couldn't accomplish through understanding rather than intimidation. Rodriguez's success had shown that building trust with enemy personnel could provide access to intelligence that psychological pressure couldn't obtain, and that empathetic approaches could prove more effective than traditional aggressive methods for gathering critical information from culturally motivated subjects. Her techniques had proven that strength in military operations sometimes emerged from recognizing shared humanity rather than exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, and that tactical effectiveness could be enhanced by approaches that emphasized healing and understanding rather than aggressive confrontation. The intelligence-gathering methods Rodriguez had developed through medical training and humanitarian instincts had become recognized special operations capabilities that were achieving strategic success by building human connections rather than applying psychological pressure to resistant subjects. Her empathetic interrogation techniques had demonstrated that military objectives could be achieved through compassionate approaches that recognized enemy personnel as human beings rather than targets for aggressive psychological manipulation, proving that understanding could be more tactically valuable than intimidation. Rodriguez's career had shown that tactical success in complex operational environments sometimes required leaders who could build trust and rapport rather than apply pressure, and that humanitarian approaches could achieve intelligence-gathering results that traditional aggressive methods couldn't accomplish through understanding human motivations. The woman who had been told she was too nice for war had proven that gentleness could be a formidable military capability when applied with tactical intelligence and strategic understanding of human psychology, demonstrating that empathy was a tactical advantage rather than operational weakness in specific circumstances. Her success had established empathetic interrogation as a recognized special operations capability that achieved superior results through building human connections rather than exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, proving that compassionate approaches could be as tactically effective as traditional aggressive techniques under appropriate operational conditions. Rodriguez's humanitarian methods had become training standards for special operations forces whose missions required gathering intelligence from subjects who responded better to empathy than aggression, demonstrating that tactical effectiveness could be enhanced by recognizing shared humanity even with enemy personnel. The captain who had offered healing when others offered threats had achieved strategic success that saved American lives through intelligence gathered by understanding rather than overpowering enemy subjects, proving that true military strength sometimes emerged through compassionate approaches that built trust rather than applied pressure. Her techniques had shown that empathy could be a powerful tactical capability in military operations where human connections provided access to critical information that aggressive interrogation methods couldn't obtain, demonstrating that gentle approaches could achieve superior results through understanding rather than intimidation. Rodriguez's career had proven that military effectiveness could be enhanced by humanitarian approaches that recognized the tactical value of building trust and rapport with enemy personnel who possessed intelligence that could save coalition lives through cooperation rather than coercion. The woman who had been mocked for kindness had become the reason lives were saved through intelligence-gathering techniques that emphasized understanding over aggression, proving that compassionate approaches could achieve strategic objectives that traditional methods couldn't accomplish through building human connections rather than exploiting psychological vulnerabilities. But Rodriguez's most significant test would come 18 months later, during an operation that would define not only her career, but fundamentally reshaped special operations doctrine regarding the tactical value of empathetic leadership in complex combat environments where traditional aggressive approaches had consistently failed to achieve strategic objectives. The emergency briefing at Special Operations Command Headquarters in Tampa arrived via encrypted channels at 0230 hours, carrying priority classifications that indicated immediate deployment requirements for the most sensitive missions in the current operational theater. Rodriguez had been specifically requested for an assignment that would test every lesson learned about empathetic approaches in military environments where understanding human motivations was as important as tactical competence for mission success. Major General Patricia Williams reviewed classified intelligence reports in the secure briefing room 3 levels beneath SOCOM headquarters, her weathered features reflecting the gravity of operations that would determine whether American hostages survived captivity in one of the world's most dangerous regions. Williams had commanded special operations forces across multiple theaters where conventional military approaches had proven inadequate for achieving objectives that required cultural sensitivity and human understanding rather than superior firepower. "Captain Rodriguez," Williams said as Rodriguez entered the briefing facility, "you've been selected for this mission based on your proven ability to achieve tactical success through empathetic approaches that traditional military methods cannot accomplish." Rodriguez settled into the briefing chair while studying holographic displays that showed satellite imagery of mountainous terrain where intelligence indicated American personnel were being held by terrorist organizations whose motivations extended beyond conventional military or political objectives. The operational environment presented challenges that conventional rescue operations couldn't address without risking hostage casualties. "Ma'am, what's the tactical situation?" Rodriguez asked, examining terrain analysis that revealed defensive positions and security measures that would complicate traditional special operations rescue attempts. Williams activated intelligence displays showing detailed assessments of the terrorist organization holding American hostages in conditions that conventional military approaches had proven unable to address effectively. 3 American aid workers were captured 6 weeks ago while providing medical assistance to civilian populations affected by ongoing conflict in the region. The intelligence data revealed that the captured Americans were being held by a terrorist organization whose ideological motivations made them resistant to traditional negotiation or military pressure. Previous rescue attempts by conventional special operations forces had failed due to the complex cultural and psychological factors that influence terrorist decision-making. Intelligence assessment of enemy motivations, Rodriguez inquired, studying psychological profiles that indicated these particular terrorists were driven by factors that conventional military pressure couldn't address effectively. Williams manipulated displays to show cultural analysis reports that revealed the terrorist organization's belief systems, historical grievances, and psychological patterns that made them particularly resistant to traditional military approaches. These individuals are motivated by ideological convictions that conventional pressure tactics have proven unable to overcome. Rodriguez studied the psychological assessments while recognizing patterns similar to those she had encountered during previous empathetic interrogation operations. The terrorist profiles suggested individuals whose cooperation might be achievable through understanding their human motivations rather than applying military pressure. "Ma'am, have previous operations attempted empathetic approaches rather than conventional military pressure?" Rodriguez asked, noting that traditional special operations doctrine emphasized aggressive action rather than cultural understanding for hostage rescue missions. Williams activated additional intelligence reports showing multiple failed rescue attempts that had employed conventional special operations tactics without addressing the cultural and psychological factors that influence terrorist behavior. Previous operations have focused on tactical superiority and aggressive action, with limited success due to terrorist willingness to harm hostages rather than surrender to military pressure. The intelligence data revealed a pattern of terrorist responses that suggested conventional military approaches actually increased risks to hostage safety by triggering defensive behaviors that prioritized ideological resistance over practical considerations. Rodriguez recognized that this operational environment might require empathetic approaches that addressed human motivations rather than tactical vulnerabilities. "General, What's the proposed operational approach for this mission? Rodriguez asked, understanding that her selection indicated recognition of empathetic methods as potentially superior to conventional tactics for this specific situation. Williams activated comprehensive mission briefings that outlined approaches fundamentally different from traditional special operations hostage rescue doctrine. Captain Rodriguez, you'll be inserted as primary negotiator with authorization to employ empathetic techniques that address terrorists' psychological motivations rather than applying conventional military pressure. The mission parameters represented a dramatic departure from established special operations procedures that emphasize tactical surprise and aggressive action for hostage rescue operations. Rodriguez understood that she was being entrusted with approaches that challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness in complex cultural environments. Ma'am, what support assets are available for empathetic negotiation operations? Rodriguez inquired, recognizing that her mission would require resources different from those typically employed for conventional rescue attempts. Williams displayed logistical support that included cultural advisors, psychological specialists, and communication assets designed for extended negotiation rather than rapid tactical action. You'll have access to expertise that supports empathetic approaches rather than conventional military capabilities. Rodriguez studied the mission requirements while understanding that success would depend on her ability to build trust and rapport with terrorists whose ideological motivations made them resistant to traditional military pressure. Her empathetic techniques would be tested under conditions where failure could result in hostage deaths. General, what's the timeline for empathetic negotiation compared to conventional rescue operations? Rodriguez asked, recognizing that her approaches would require patience and relationship building rather than rapid tactical action. Williams activated timeline projections that showed extended operational periods compared to conventional special operations missions. Success through empathetic methods may require weeks of careful relationship building rather than hours of tactical action. The operational timeline indicated that Rodriguez's mission would test whether empathetic approaches could achieve results that conventional tactics couldn't accomplish, but success would require sustained commitment to understanding terrorist motivations rather than overcoming resistance through superior firepower. 2 days later, Rodriguez found herself positioned at a forward observation post within communication range of the terrorist compound, where American hostages were being held under conditions that conventional rescue attempts had proven unable to address effectively. Her mission required establishing communication with terrorist leaders whose cooperation could only be achieved through empathetic understanding rather than military pressure. Control, this is Angel 6. Rodriguez reported through encrypted communication channels, using call signs that emphasized her role as humanitarian negotiator rather than tactical operator. Establishing initial communication protocols with target personnel. The response came from Major Sarah Chan, who was coordinating empathetic negotiation support from a joint operations center equipped with cultural analysis capabilities that could provide real-time guidance for understanding terrorist psychological patterns. Angel 6, you are cleared to initiate empathetic contact procedures. Maintain focus on building trust rather than applying pressure. Rodriguez activated communication equipment designed for extended conversation rather than tactical coordination, her approach emphasizing patient relationship building rather than aggressive demands for hostage release. Her initial contact would establish whether empathetic methods could create conditions for productive negotiation. This is Elena Rodriguez, she said through loudspeakers positioned to reach the terrorist compound. I'm here to talk about helping wounded people, not to threaten or demand anything. The response took several hours, indicating terrorist caution about American intentions that extended beyond conventional military objectives. When communication finally came, it reflected suspicion about American motivations that conventional approaches had been unable to overcome. American soldier, why do you claim interest in helping rather than attacking? Came the reply, spoken in accented English that indicated education and intelligence among terrorist leadership. Rodriguez recognized the question as an opportunity to establish empathetic rapport rather than demonstrate military superiority. I'm a doctor. My job is healing people, regardless of politics or conflict. I know you have wounded who need medical attention. The terrorist response showed surprise at American focus on humanitarian concerns rather than hostage demands, or military threats. Rodriguez's empathetic approach was creating psychological conditions different from what terrorist leadership expected from American military personnel. "You offer medical help to enemies?" the terrorist asked, his question indicating curiosity about American motivations that extended beyond tactical objectives. Rodriguez continued her empathetic approach while gradually building trust through consistent demonstration of humanitarian concern rather than aggressive demands. Wounded people need help. That's more important than politics. Over the following days, Rodriguez maintained patient conversation with terrorist leadership while consistently demonstrating genuine concern for human welfare rather than military objectives. Her empathetic approach was slowly building rapport that conventional pressure tactics had been unable to achieve. The terrorist leader, who identified himself as Hassan, began sharing personal information about his background and motivations that revealed complex psychological factors driving his resistance to American military pressure. Rodriguez's empathetic listening was creating conditions where human understanding could develop despite political conflict. "My family was killed by American bombs," Hassan explained during one extended conversation, his admission revealing psychological trauma that motivated terrorist activities. "Military doctors treated American wounded while my children died without medical care." Rodriguez listened with genuine empathy while recognizing that Hassan's psychological motivations stemmed from personal trauma that conventional military approaches had been unable to address. Her humanitarian focus was creating opportunities for understanding that aggressive tactics couldn't achieve. "I'm sorry for your losses," Rodriguez replied with authentic compassion, her response demonstrating American capacity for empathy rather than justification for military actions. "No parent should lose children. That pain is real regardless of politics." Hassan's response showed surprise at American acknowledgement of his personal suffering rather than dismissal of terrorist grievances. Rodriguez's empathetic approach was addressing psychological factors that drove terrorist resistance to conventional military pressure. As conversations continued over several days, Hassan gradually revealed information about hostage conditions, while Rodriguez consistently demonstrated humanitarian concern that transcended political conflict. Her empathetic methods were building trust that conventional approaches couldn't establish. "The American prisoners are not harmed," Hassan said during one conversation, "but medical supplies are needed for treating wounded fighters." Rodriguez recognized the opportunity to demonstrate practical humanitarian assistance that could further build trust while improving conditions for American hostages. "I can provide medical supplies if you allow me to treat wounded people regardless of their affiliations." Hassan considered Rodriguez's offer carefully, recognizing that American provision of medical assistance to terrorist personnel represented unprecedented demonstration of humanitarian commitment that extended beyond political objectives. Her empathetic approach was creating possibilities that conventional tactics couldn't achieve. "You would treat enemy wounded?" Hassan asked, his question indicating psychological shifting toward viewing Americans as potential humanitarian partners rather than purely military threats. Rodriguez maintained her consistent empathetic approach while offering practical demonstration of humanitarian principles that could build the trust necessary for hostage negotiations. "Medical care is about healing, not politics. Wounded people need help regardless of the conflict." After extensive consultation with terrorist leadership, Hassan agreed to allow Rodriguez to provide medical assistance within the compound, representing unprecedented access that conventional military approaches had been unable to achieve through aggressive pressure or tactical threats. "You may enter with medical supplies only," Hassan said. "No weapons, no communication equipment, no military escort." Rodriguez understood that Hassan's agreement represented extraordinary trust that her empathetic approaches had built through consistent demonstration of humanitarian concern rather than military objectives. Her access to the compound would provide opportunities for assessing hostage conditions while further building rapport. "I accept those conditions," Rodriguez replied, recognizing that entering the terrorist compound without weapons or communication represented significant personal risk but provided the only opportunity for achieving mission success through empathetic methods. The following day, Rodriguez entered the terrorist compound carrying medical supplies and humanitarian provisions, her presence representing the first American military personnel to achieve peaceful access through empathetic negotiation rather than tactical force. Hassan personally escorted her to wounded fighters who required medical attention. "These are our injured," Hassan said, indicating several wounded terrorists whose medical needs had been ignored during conventional military operations that emphasized tactical objectives over humanitarian concerns. Rodriguez began treating wounded terrorists with the same professional medical care she provided to American personnel, her actions demonstrating authentic humanitarian commitment that transcended political boundaries. Hassan observed her work with obvious surprise at American empathy for enemy casualties. "You treat enemies like friends," Hassan commented as Rodriguez carefully treated serious injuries among terrorist personnel. Rodriguez continued her medical work while explaining humanitarian principles that guided her actions regardless of political conflict. Healing is about reducing suffering, not about choosing sides in politics. As medical treatment continued, Hassan gradually allowed Rodriguez access to areas of the compound where American hostages were being held, representing trust that conventional military approaches had been unable to establish through aggressive tactics or threatening pressure. Rodriguez found the 3 American aid workers in reasonable health, but obviously stressed by captivity conditions that reflected terrorist uncertainty about American intentions. Her presence provided the first direct communication between hostages and American representatives since their capture. "Are you here to rescue us?" asked Dr. Michael Patterson, one of the captured aid workers whose medical background made him particularly valuable to terrorist forces seeking medical expertise. Rodriguez explained her empathetic approach while assessing hostage conditions and psychological states that would influence negotiation possibilities. "I'm here to build understanding that might create opportunities for your release through cooperation rather than conflict." The hostages provided information about their treatment and terrorist motivations, while Rodriguez continued demonstrating humanitarian concern that addressed human needs rather than political objectives. Her empathetic methods were creating conditions where negotiated release might become possible. Over several days of continued access to the compound, Rodriguez maintained medical treatment for wounded terrorists while building personal relationships with Hassan and other terrorist leaders whose cooperation was essential for hostage release. Her consistent humanitarian focus was gradually changing terrorist perceptions of American motivations. "Why does America send doctors instead of soldiers?" Hassan asked during one medical treatment session, his question indicating psychological shifting toward viewing Americans as potential humanitarian partners rather than purely military threats. Rodriguez continued her empathetic approach while explaining American values that emphasized human welfare over political objectives. "Because healing people is more important than winning conflicts." Hassan's gradual acceptance of Rodriguez's humanitarian authenticity created opportunities for discussing hostage release as humanitarian cooperation rather than surrender to military pressure. Her empathetic methods were achieving possibilities that conventional tactics couldn't establish. "The American prisoners could be released if medical assistance continues for our wounded," Hassan suggested during one conversation, indicating terrorist willingness to negotiate based on humanitarian cooperation rather than military coercion. Rodriguez recognized Hassan's suggestion as breakthrough progress that her empathetic approaches had achieved through consistent demonstration of humanitarian concern rather than military pressure. Medical assistance can continue regardless of politics if it helps reduce suffering. Hassan consulted with terrorist leadership about Rodriguez's humanitarian authenticity while considering possibilities for hostage release based on cooperation rather than surrender to American military pressure. Her empathetic methods had created negotiation opportunities that conventional approaches couldn't achieve. After extensive terrorist deliberation, Hassan announced that American hostages would be released in exchange for continued medical assistance and humanitarian supplies that demonstrated American commitment to reducing suffering rather than achieving political objectives. "The prisoners will be released to show appreciation for medical help that was provided without political demands," Hassan explained, indicating terrorist recognition of Rodriguez's authentic humanitarian motivations. Rodriguez coordinated hostage release procedures while maintaining her commitment to continued medical assistance that had built the trust necessary for successful negotiation. Her empathetic approaches had achieved mission success through understanding rather than coercion. The 3 American hostages were released safely after 6 weeks of captivity, their freedom achieved through empathetic negotiation rather than conventional military rescue operations that had previously failed to accomplish mission objectives through aggressive tactics. Rodriguez's success demonstrated that empathetic approaches could achieve strategic objectives that conventional military methods couldn't accomplish through building trust and understanding rather than applying pressure and threats to resistant terrorist organizations. Major General Williams' operational report specifically commended Rodriguez's empathetic negotiation techniques for achieving hostage release that conventional special operations methods had been unable to accomplish through traditional aggressive approaches. Captain Rodriguez's humanitarian methods achieved mission success that conventional tactics could not accomplish, Williams wrote in her assessment, demonstrating that empathetic approaches represent valuable strategic capabilities for complex operational environments. Rodriguez received assignment to develop specialized training programs that would teach empathetic negotiation techniques to special operations personnel whose missions required achieving cooperation from hostile forces through understanding rather than coercion. Her humanitarian approaches were being recognized as tactical capabilities that could prove superior to conventional military methods for achieving strategic objectives in cultural environments where aggressive pressure increased resistance rather than encouraging cooperation. 6 months later, Rodriguez's empathetic negotiation techniques were being taught to special operations forces worldwide as proven methods for achieving mission success in situations where conventional military approaches had consistently failed to accomplish strategic objectives. Training programs based on Rodriguez's humanitarian methods emphasized building trust and understanding as tactical capabilities that could prove more effective than aggressive pressure for achieving cooperation from hostile forces in complex cultural environments. Field reports from units trained in Rodriguez's empathetic techniques showed consistently superior mission success rates compared to conventional military approaches when dealing with terrorist organizations and hostile forces whose cooperation required trust rather than coercion. Rodriguez's methods had proven that empathy represented a strategic military capability rather than operational weakness in environments where human understanding was more tactically valuable than superior firepower for achieving mission objectives. Her humanitarian approaches had demonstrated that building relationships could be more effective than applying pressure for achieving cooperation from hostile forces whose motivations required empathetic understanding rather than military coercion. The captain, who had been dismissed as too soft for war, had achieved strategic success that conventional military methods couldn't accomplish, proving that empathetic leadership could be more tactically effective than aggressive approaches under specific operational circumstances. Rodriguez's techniques had shown that humanitarian concern could provide tactical advantages that conventional military methods couldn't achieve, demonstrating that understanding human motivations was sometimes more valuable than superior firepower for accomplishing mission objectives. Her empathetic negotiation methods had become standard special operations capabilities that achieved strategic success through building human connections rather than applying military pressure, proving that compassionate approaches could be as tactically effective as traditional aggressive techniques. The woman who had offered healing when others offered threats had achieved mission success that saved American lives through understanding rather than coercion, demonstrating that true military strength sometimes emerged through empathetic approaches that built trust rather than applied pressure. Rodriguez's career had proven that military effectiveness could be enhanced by humanitarian methods that recognized the tactical value of building relationships with hostile forces whose cooperation was essential for achieving strategic objectives in complex cultural environments. Her success had established empathetic negotiation as recognized special operations doctrine that achieved superior results through understanding human motivations rather than overcoming resistance through conventional military pressure, proving that compassionate approaches could be more tactically effective than aggressive methods. The captain, who had been mocked for kindness, had become the reason American hostages returned home safely through negotiation techniques that emphasized understanding over intimidation, demonstrating that humanitarian concern could achieve strategic objectives that conventional tactics couldn't accomplish. Rodriguez's empathetic methods had shown that building trust could be more powerful than applying pressure for achieving cooperation from hostile forces, and that gentle approaches could accomplish mission objectives that aggressive techniques couldn't achieve through understanding rather than coercion. Her techniques had proven that strength in special operations sometimes emerged from recognizing shared humanity rather than demonstrating military superiority, and that tactical effectiveness could be enhanced by approaches that emphasized healing and understanding rather than aggression and intimidation. The woman who had been told she was too nice for war had demonstrated that gentleness could be a formidable military capability when applied with tactical intelligence and strategic understanding of human psychology, proving that empathy was a tactical advantage rather than operational weakness. Rodriguez's humanitarian approaches had achieved strategic success that conventional military methods couldn't accomplish, demonstrating that compassionate leadership could be more tactically effective than aggressive approaches for accomplishing mission objectives in complex cultural environments where understanding was more valuable than intimidation.